Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen and I'm here today with another top 10 video, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite animated movies, which once again, like I say every time, this list was very hard to make. I mean, looking at Pixar alone, I have like 4 that I consider to be kind of Pixar's golden era that all are basically a tie almost, that kind of on this list vie for that top 1 or 2 spot. But obviously I didn't want half of this list to just be Pixar, so I forced myself to just pick one of those 4 movies. So a very difficult list to construct. I do think I'm going to do a tier ranking of Pixar movies at some point. But yeah, jumping right in to this very difficult list, in the number 10 spot, we have Meet the Robinsons, which I feel is a bit of an underrated Disney animation. It's such a fun, unique movie that's kind of all built around this Disney quote of keep moving forward, and it's just got everything. It's got time travel, it's got a cast of very kooky characters, it's got an excellent villain, it's hilarious, and is definitely a Disney movie that if you missed, I would recommend going back to watch. Next, number 9 on the list is the only one that is not Disney or Pixar, and it is also a tie, and that is Shrek and the Croods. So starting with Shrek, this of course is a childhood classic for me. This was probably my funniest animation growing up. It was one that felt a little more adult, but also was still fairy tale based, which I love anything that's fairy tale based. Of course, it's Mike Myers, so I always associated it with one of my top favorite comedies of all time, Austin Powers. And yeah, probably the only non-Disney animation that is a real childhood classic for me. And then tied with Shrek is The Croods, which is a lot newer, but was just such a cute animation that I watched for the first time as an adult, and is one that I felt like, oh, this has such a great, cute message for kids, and I could really appreciate it as an adult. Next, number 8 is Peter Pan, which this is a real old Disney classic, obviously, so it's got kind of that aged feeling that some other real classic Disney movies have, but this is kind of where my love for Peter Pan as a whole started, so I felt like I had to include it on the list because I love Peter Pan so much, from the original book to the Disney movie to all of the mini book and movie spin-offs and rehashes. But for me, this is where it all started. Next, number 7 on the list is the only newer Pixar movie on the list, and that is Onward. This one just came out like a year or 2 ago, and I loved it so much. I had really high hopes for it based just on the trailer and some like behind the scenes information I had heard about the movie. It's about these 2 brothers who discover a magic spell that will bring their dad, who died when they were little, back for a day. And the writers on the movie were 2 brothers whose dad died when they were little, and when they were older they found a cassette tape with his voice on it. And so I just knew right away, just based on that concept and the fact that I would know that backstory, that this would be a real crier of a movie and just a very good movie, and it did turn out to be a very good movie. And it really had that feel of like golden age Pixar kind of a movie for me. Next, number 6 on the list is Big Hero 6, which I feel like it doesn't feel like your typical Disney animation. It's a superhero team movie, and the real star of the show here is Baymax the robot. He's just such an adorable character, and he really makes you fall in love with this movie. Next, number 5 on the list is another tie and also another set of classic movies, and that is Lady and the Tramp and The Fox and the Hound. So I'll talk about Lady and the Tramp first, which of course, as I said, this is just a classic that I loved growing up. I think childhood me had a huge crush on Tramp. And I actually watched the live action version for this recently, and it was not as bad as you would think, considering it went straight to streaming. And some of the live action remakes that actually went to theaters were terrible. But this one actually was not half bad. So if you have not already seen the live action, I would recommend it, and then give the old cartoon a rewatch too. And then the other one in this number 5 spot was The Fox and the Hound, which I feel is a very underrated Disney classic, even by Disney, the company itself. I always get so upset when I hear interviews with people from Disney kind of hating on The Fox and the Hound, because at the time the company was almost bankrupt, and so the movies during that time they couldn't spend as much money on, and so a lot of the artists that worked on them and stuff just didn't like them as much. And they seem to especially like to shit on The Fox and the Hound, and I love this movie. I think the friendship between Todd and Copper is so sweet. It's a very engaging movie. There's a lot of like scary stuff and action that kept me on the edge of my seat as a kid. So yeah, I always get sad about how underrated this one is. Moving on to number 4 on the list, we have Lilo and Stitch, which again is one of those kind of more out there kooky movies, it feels like. Obviously, Stitch is adorable, and this one has a surprising amount of heart and was kind of one of the last 2D animations before the switch to computer animation happened. And so this one always has a lot of nostalgia. Moving on to the top 3, we have another tie in the number 3 spot. We've got 2 of the Disney princess movies. So tied at number 3 is Frozen and The Princess and the Frog. I will note that Ariel is my favorite princess, but now that I'm older, she doesn't have the most engaging movie. But anyways, first is Frozen. What can I say? I'm a sucker for one very engaging character in movies. If it's got one really great, really lovable, really funny character, I can get behind that character and make it my favorite movie. And in this case, it's Olaf. He's right up there with Baymax for me. And then this movie also just has one of the best soundtracks, some really gorgeous costumes, and obviously is one that really blew up and became very popular. I will say I did not enjoy the sequel much at all. In fact, The Little Mermaid's direct-to-VHS sequel, for me, was better than the Frozen sequel. And then next, also at number 3 on the list, is The Princess and the Frog, which is another one that I feel is very underrated. I don't know if it didn't do well because it was 2D animation in a time when computer animation had already taken over, but I really loved that personally. It automatically gave it this nostalgia, even though it came out when I was already an adult, and to me it was just perfect for the story. And the real shining character here for me was Ray the Firefly. I love him so much. His love for the star Evangeline is so sweet, and this for me is one of the best princess movies. Moving on, number 2 on the list is Finding Nemo, which this is one of those 4 that I talked about at the beginning of the video, where Pixar just had a run of like 4 movies in a row in their early days that for me are like their golden era, and among those, Finding Nemo is the pinnacle for me. And finally, moving on to number 1 on the list, the quintessential, I feel like most popular pick as Disney's best animated movie, of course, The Lion King. What can I say? I'm with the crowd here on this one. The soundtrack is so good, the story is so good, it's a childhood classic. It's one that I could watch over and over back then, and one that I could watch over and over now. So yeah, that was it for my top 10 animated movies. Let me know down below some of your favorite animated movies. And now onto the quote for today's video, which today I have one from Harry Potter, and it is said by Dumbledore, and it goes, "There's a room in the Department of Mysteries," interrupted Dumbledore, "that is kept locked at all times. It contains a force that is at once more wonderful and more terrible than death, than human intelligence, than forces of nature. It is also, perhaps, the most mysterious of the many subjects for study that reside there." Which, if you know, you know. I hope you enjoyed watching. Remember, words matter.